Russian foreign minister has had a frank exchange with his American counterpart over Washington's approach towards North Korea. The two spoke by phone, with the details later released by the Russian Foreign Ministry.
Sergei Lavrov pointed out once again that heightening tensions over the Korean peninsula through Washington's aggressive rhetoric towards Pyongyang and stepping up military preparations in the region is unacceptable.
The phone call took place around the same time the U.S. sanctioned two top North Korean officials who were allegedly involved in the country's ballistic missile program. But in the phone call, Foreign Minister Lavrov mentioned the U.S. stepping up its military preparations in the region. And he was likely referring to recent military exercises. And even South Korea has suggested postponing military drills until after the Olympics. But this proposal was swiftly rejected by Secretary Tillerson.
It is possible for South Korea and the U.S. to review the possibility of postponing the exercises. I have made such a suggestion to the U.S., and the U.S. is currently reviewing it.
These exercises have been ongoing for many years. I'm not aware of any plans to change what is scheduled.
Fiery rhetoric between Washington and Pyongyang has kept the international community on its toes for quite some time now. But let's take a quick look at a recap.
The era of strategic patience with the North Korean regime has failed.
The United States is prepared to use the full range of our capabilities to defend ourselves and our allies.
Our respected leader, Kim Jong-un, said that the U.S. would be unhappy to witness North Korea's strategic power on its Independence Day and called for frequently sending big and small gift packages.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
The forthcoming measures to be taken by the DPRK will cause the U.S. the greatest pain and suffering it has ever gone through in its entire history.
But if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
We will control the mentally deranged U.S. dotard with fire.
Little rocket man, rocket fuel for the American economy. He is a sick puppy.
Russia has repeatedly offered to mediate the situation, but we've been hearing mixed messages from the Trump administration. So it's unclear whether this phone call will make any difference whatsoever, but it definitely seems like quite the positive direction.
We also face rival powers, Russia and China, that seek to challenge American influence, values, and wealth. We will attempt to build a great partnership with those and other countries, but in a manner that always protects our national interest.
Of North Korea. This influx of fuel is so substantial that since early November, the price of diesel oil has fallen by about 60% in North Korea. And during that same time frame, the price of gasoline has fallen by more than 25%. This is a great quantity of oil, and it's also noteworthy that it's coming into North Korea's Gyeong province, because Gyeong does not border Russia. A different section of North Korea borders Russia, but for Russia to get this fuel into the Gyeong province, the Russians would first have to ship it through a section of northeast China. So this shows that China is at a minimum complicit in this fuel underhandedly flooding into North Korea. This is significant news because back on September 11th, just after North Korea had conducted its 6th nuclear weapons test, both Russia and China voted to pass a United Nations Security Council measure that restricted exports of refined petroleum products to North Korea. So both Moscow and Beijing signed on to those UN measures, and as a result, the price of fuel in North Korea skyrocketed during late September and October. By early November, those prices were very high, indicating that the economic pressure that the United States and the United Nations were hoping to apply on North Korea was reaching a meaningful level. But this is apparently around the time when that Russian fuel began to arrive in North Korea via China. And the numbers show that that Russian fuel really is reducing that economic pressure on the North. This is not the first time that Russia and China have thrown economic lifelines to North Korea. The two have often used their United Nations veto power to protect North Korea, and they both also bypassed sanctions and exploited legal loopholes in order to keep the regime of Kim Jong-un afloat. Trumpet editor-in-chief Gerald Flurry has recently said that it is actually Russia and China that the world should be more concerned about than North Korea. And that's in large part because it is these two nations, Russia and China, that really allow North Korea to behave as dangerously as it does. And Mr. Flurry explained that this analysis of the situation is based on Bible prophecy. In a September 13th message, he said, quote, "The Bible's prophecies show that, in a sense, the North Korea crisis is a massive distraction from the real threat posed by China and Russia. These powerful Asian nations are the only reason North Korea is able to operate so freely. And Bible prophecy shows that they pose a threat many times greater than the one from North Korea." The Bible prophecies that Mr. Flurry is referring to are found mainly in the book of Revelation and in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39, and also in Daniel 11. These books and chapters show that Russia will very soon end up leading a vastly powerful military bloc, and that China will be in sort of a secondary leadership position in that bloc. The prophecies show that smaller Asian nations such as North Korea will be assimilated into that Russian-led Asian military bloc, and they will lend their military might to it, but they will not be major players. To understand more about the significance of Russia and China's support,
the North Korea dilemma is getting even more complicated for President Trump. Now it looks like both Russia and China have been secretly shipping oil to North Korea in violation of the United Nations sanctions. We told you last night how a U.S. spy satellite photos apparently show Chinese ships transferring oil to North Korean ships at sea. Now, two senior European security sources tell Reuters that the Russians have been doing the same thing. Let's discuss what this means with Fox News contributor and political science professor Kyron Skinner in San Francisco. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. This is a very difficult situation. I mean, on one hand, you had a very impressive vote in the United Nations, only now to have evidence that both Russia and China are violating these same sanctions. What would you recommend to the president?
What's actually happening here is that global leadership is being devolved to the United States, and because the Russians and Chinese are not living up to United Nations Security Council resolutions, especially the one in September, they're violating international law and international norms, and I would suggest that the President of the United States make it absolutely clear that if the governments in Russia and China do not penalize and stop those shipping companies that are trading oil with the North Koreans, that the United States has to begin to look at military options, and that underscore the fact that the United States is actually going to become the leader of resolving the North Korean conflict within Northeast Asia and beyond. And that's not something I think the Russians and the Chinese want to happen.
Now, to add the clarity that you're seeking, a military option against China and Russia is probably not viable, but they can do some things, for instance, such as a naval blockade. Is that what you mean by saying taking action and military action?
I'm not really suggesting military action because I know that the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense do not want to go down that path. They've been working overtime on the diplomatic front, but we have to let our strategic adversaries in the North Korea issue understand that the full range of options have to be on the table. We will continue to use diplomacy aggressively, but they have to know that if they make North Korea much more of an unstable regime by propping it up, it serves no good interest for them as well. I don't think they quite understand it yet.
Now, the president has tried to channel Ronald Reagan in his whole peace through strength approach. Is the United Nations as worthless as it seems from at least my vantage point?
I wouldn't say it's worthless. It is a huge debating society where often in the General Assembly, the United States is the target. But the fact that we got unanimous votes in the United Nations suggests that the international community is moving in the direction of what the United States has been saying all along, especially under President Trump, that North Korea has to be a denuclearized country because it is so particularly dangerous. It could be the site of nuclear proliferation throughout Northeast Asia, indeed the Indo-Pacific region. And so I think what it can do for the United States now, under the America First policy of the president, is help reinforce the issues that America First and principled realism, a pillar of the president's policy, suggests, is that sovereignty matters, that respecting international norms and laws, they matter as well. And so in that way, the UN does play a useful role.
My own personal take on this is that more sanctions isn't going to work because the leader of North Korea really doesn't care about his people. But last question for you real quick. The idea of a naval blockade to prohibit the importation of things that are needed and critical in North Korea, do you believe that is one of the viable things sitting on the president's desk?
I think it's being debated in the Pentagon and in the national security community. Whether it's on the president's desk, I don't know. But let me just speak to your pessimism on UN Security Council resolutions. They do work when there is compliance. And if given the strict nature of the most recent December resolution against North Korea in the Security Council, if indeed it's implemented fully, it has a punishing impact on the North Korean economy. The Russians and Chinese, if they don't comply, they are undermining something that could really bring North Korea to the negotiating table.